final chapter today will be the tragedy of modern masculinity. And now this is a topic that I want to be very careful with because I want to make sure that what I believe is getting brought across in the way that I want it to be brought across. So I think that I'm going to be reading from I have some notes written down, so I'm going to be reading from that a little bit. I think that there are several versions of masculinity that are fighting within the culture. There's the sort of Andrew Tate tough guy who I don't like. I don't like anything really that he stands for. And then there's the meeker type that views masculinity as toxic. And then there's the third kind that seeks to find masculinity in a family and in adventure and in love and in sacrifice. And that's the version of masculinity that I hopefully am trying to portray. I mean, this is called the Dear Young Men podcast. So I don't expect really any women to watch this at all, except for my wife. And she already knows what I think about all this stuff. So the third kind is the one that I am trying to portray in my life. I'm trying to be the third version of masculinity. The Andrew Tate kind and why I don't like it, the first version. He's a pimp. I mean, that's how he's made a ton of money. He says he's worth like trillions of dollars. I don't think that that's true at all, but he's made a bunch of money off of the abuse of women. And I don't like that. Like, that's bad. I have 2 daughters and I would rather be dead. Like, I would rather go to jail for a lifetime than have my kids, have my kids be abused the way that he's abused women. Next, the tough guy is like this idea of men is this new modern idea of men is like he's in really good shape. He's strong. Sometimes they're on steroids. They're like sort of a superhero type. And they sleep with a bunch of women. They have a lot of stuff. They're very materialistic. They live in a big mansion. They have fast cars. They have all this stuff. And stuff is cool. Like, I get it. Like, nice houses, fast cars, that's kind of cool. But that's not the ideal version of masculinity. That stuff, pretty soon that fast car will be slow. Pretty soon that big house will be small. All that stuff doesn't matter. Like, you're constantly going to be wanting more and more and more. I think that's more of a product of the culture. I think women can be the same way. Again, I'm not going to speak to women because I am not one. But the tough guy that sleeps with a bunch of women, that has a lot of fast cars and big houses, that ideal is not what I want men to reach for, because there's so much more to life than fast cars and sleeping with a bunch of women. That's a very sad way to live. Most men who live like that won't admit that they're sad. They would call me beta, whatever it may be. They call themselves alpha. But at the end of the day, it's a sad way to live because you are living a materialist life, and a materialist life will never make you happy because you can never own enough things. You can never sleep with enough women to actually find the true happiness and true love that you get from a wife and from having kids. Like, you won't. I've been single. I've been a materialist guy like that. And my life, looking back, my life was miserable back then. And you don't know it in the moment until it's like purgatory or even hell. I don't know how hell is going to be depicted I believe in heaven and hell. But I sort of have this idea that people in hell, they don't realize that they're in hell, and that's what puts them in hell. They think that their life is great, they have all this stuff, but they're constantly feeling bad about themselves. And that's kind of what I imagine hell is like. You don't know you're in hell, and that's what makes it hell. Next, I think the reason the Andrew Tate archetype has become so, I think there's a lot of reasons that people really gravitate towards him. And I think a big reason is that it's a slap in the face of the toxic masculinity type of person. I think that the toxic masculinity is more of a prevailing idea within more of the elite level establishment types, the news, the colleges, those types of people, that the toxic masculinity, that's their ideal. And to be honest, some of the stuff that they say might be right sometimes. Like, raping women is a bad thing. But the idea that masculinity itself, the idea of masculinity, that's toxic, that is exactly what people are pushing back with the strong man, with the Andrew Tate, with the guy who spits in the face of that, who's the exact opposite of that version of masculinity. And the reality is there's probably something like in the middle there. Like, that's really where we're trying to come, is like the toxic masculinity and the Andrew Tate masculinity. We're trying to find somewhere in the middle for them to meet. Maybe, and we could all be kumbaya and be happy. We can sing kumbaya and be happy. So I think that's why the Andrew Tate, the strongman archetype, has become so prevalent. And it's because it's a pushback and a spit in the face of the culture. And I think men specifically, I know I'm a guy, and I know that for me, it's like sometimes you just want to disagree for the sake of an argument. And I think that that's a lot of what that is they want to just punch back because they just want to punch. They just want to hit something, and they feel like they can hit back against the culture in a way. They're not totally thinking it through. You don't normally think it through when you punch somebody. You're not thinking, man, should I do this? What are the ramifications of this? You just punch and you don't think it through. And I think that the Andrew Tate masculinity version is not thinking it through. Next, I talked about, like, I don't think that this man knows what it's like to give everything to a family, to be your family's atlas. As a father, you are called to sacrifice constantly. You are called to make the most sacrifices. You are called to carry the weight and shoulder the burden for everything in your family. Obviously, your wife is there to support you and to help you and to wipe the sweat off your brow. But like, she's not going to be able to shoulder the weight that a man should have to shoulder, because she's shouldering weight that a man can't shoulder. Like, my wife versus me consoling our kids, it's not even close. It's like, it'll take me 4 times as long as it will take her, because she just has this tenderness and this loving and this kindness that I just can never do. But she can't make the hard decision because she just wants everybody to be happy all the time. So she'll just buy a nicer house, or she would just buy the nicer car, or she would, do the types of things that I'm saying, no, we can't do that. Like, she doesn't want me to sacrifice as much as I do, but I know that I have to, because I know that that's what's right. So the tough guy doesn't know that the love from a woman, in my opinion, is because they view women as objects. They view women as, like, they want to have as many notches in their belt as they possibly can. And that's a sad way to live, because women are so much more, trust me, women are so much more than just like a notch on the bedpost. They are so much more than that. Trust me. And I think that at the end of the day, like, I do kind of get the Andrew Tate version, because, like, the way the culture has sort of pushed it's just so opposite of that. It's like the divorce courts are just very anti-man. Like, it's just how it is. It's how it is. I mean, I'm going to sit here and say that I don't agree with it, but it's just the way that the cookie is crumbled, and that's life. And I think a lot of these guys are anti-marriage. They're anti-everything that I'm sort of saying. But it's a risk to get married. And I think that it's a risk worth taking. And I would suggest anybody should get married. It will change your life in ways you could just never possibly imagine. Obviously, there's a huge risk. I mean, you're going to sacrifice. I sacrifice so much, and if my wife leaves me, I'll be heartbroken. Like, I will have given everything for them. But it's like, it's a risk, and you got to be a risk taker. Like, that's life. You got to take the risk. That's what you just have to do. So I get it, but also at the same time too, it's like the risk, it's worth it. There is a risk though. It's not just, getting married, your life will be amazing for the rest of your life. People are dirty and rotten. We're all just a bunch of fallen people. But the upsides to a marriage are far greater than the downsides. And it's a risk worth taking, but it is a risk, and you have to understand that. Okay, so I'm not going to really talk about the toxic masculinity guy. I think that some of the points that they bring up, like I mentioned earlier, might potentially be valid. And I just, like, we don't need this to be a Scott Schroeder destroys woke TikTok feminist boyfriends. There's a million of those videos already. I'm not really interested in making that. I want to change people's hearts and minds through, like, more love instead of, like, just, I don't know, like, making people feel bad. It's fine. Like, there's a better way to do it. We don't have to just punch down, and that's fine. I disagree with that. I disagree with the way they view the world. I think that potentially, obviously, they might have some points, but I disagree with most of everything that they say. And finally, the final version of masculinity is, to me, it's the Jesus archetype. It's the type of man who will give everything for the people that he loves. Obviously, Jesus dies on the cross for everybody, for all sins, but men are called to emulate Jesus in a marriage. Like, that's what they're called to do. They're called to emulate God, basically, to do their best. They never will. Trust me, I know I won't. But, like, that's what you're called to do. Is you're called to sacrifice. You're called to make the sacrifice play, basically. You're called to be put on the cross sometimes. And that's just what it comes down to be a man, in my opinion. So in our case, we are going to carry the weight of the family. I've talked about Atlas and how he carries the weight of the world, and I think that that's what we are called to do, to carry the weight of the world. I think a lot of the cultural masculinity is broken. It's why we have so many superhero films. It's like we just want to see a tough guy punch. We just want to see a big, like, our version of masculinity now is either the toxic masculinity or the like Captain America masculinity, where he's a decent guy actually, but he like his superpower, like the reason we like him is because he can punch really hard, and that's it. Like that's why we like him, because he fights bad guys and he wears tights, and that's exactly the whole culture. Every movie is just superheroes. It's because we're just broken. We don't know how to portray men and women anymore in a way that shows off the best parts of each version. Like it's so silly because I feel like it's not that hard, but I think it's become so hard because we've completely just sacrificed everything for stuff and for a materialist worldview. I think at the end of the day, you as a guy and me as a guy, we are called to love, not to bench press 500 pounds. And I think that it's important to be in good shape. I actually think that it's important to be in good shape. Just don't let it become vain and vanity. But at the end of the day, it's like you're called to love. You're called to sacrifice. And love and sacrifice are a lot different versions. Like love, sacrifice, take risks. I think that's what it is to be a man. And it's not to bench press 500 pounds. It's not to be on steroids. It's not to abuse women. It's not to have sex with every single woman you could possibly see. That's not what it's about. You're called to love. You're called to sacrifice. You're called to take risks. You're called to just do the things that will make your life better. That's what you're called to do.